Hello and welcome to our Bible study. If you've just joined us, we are on a journey through the Bible. In each 15-minute episode, we quickly travel through one book. My hope and prayer is that after viewing the book from the air, so to speak, you'll be encouraged and motivated to get down on the ground and read the book for yourself. Well, today we're looking at the book of Judges. Last week when we looked at the book of Joshua, which described how God led Joshua and the Israelites to conquer the promised land. And in the mystery books, God invites us to watch and listen, to learn about Him from the way He has interacted with His chosen people as He continues to prepare for the appearance of His Messiah and the plan of salvation. Judges describes the tragic downward spiral from the renewal of the covenant in the last days of Joshua to anarchy, violence, and depravity. The book is unflinching in its description of how far the Israelites fell and clearly states why this happened. There are some very important lessons for us today in the book of Judges. Against this dark background, one thing stands out like a light, giving hope and encouragement. And that is the faithfulness of God. The faithfulness of God to the covenant and to His word is in stark contrast to the unfaithfulness of His people. In the book of Judges, there is a cycle of idolatry, slavery, and deliverance, which is repeated 13 times and forms the downward spiral. Under Joshua, it was absolutely clear that the Israelites' success in conquering their enemies depended upon their faithfulness and obedience to God. People sometimes get the impression that the Israelites made a clean sweep of the whole land, driving out or killing all the previous inhabitants. Well, this was far from the case. As the opening chapters of Judges makes clear, there were many Canaanite cities and lands that remained unconquered. Large tracts of land were held by hostile people groups. The Israelites established themselves in 12 cities and land. They were surrounded by kings who wanted to recapture the land. The situation was like Daniel in the lion's den. Only God prevented the lions from attacking and devouring Daniel. God protected Daniel because he was righteous and faithful. Just as in the conquest, so in the time of settlement. The Israelites' survival depended upon the Lord, and the Lord had made it very clear in His covenant that He would defend and protect them only if they remained faithful. Otherwise, He would allow their enemies to oppress them. The Israelites were seduced by the idolatry and the surrounding peoples, especially the fertility religions. The Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight and served the images of Baal. They abandoned the Lord, the God of their ancestors, who had brought them out of Egypt. They went after other gods, worshipping the gods of the people around them. And they angered God. So He handed them over to raiders who stole their possessions. He turned them over to their enemies all around, and they were no longer able to resist them. The people were defeated and oppressed by cruel kings, just like their time of slavery in Egypt. Now, these periods of oppression varied from 8 years at the beginning to 40 years at the time of the last judge. The Lord raised up leaders called judges who called the people back to God and drove back their oppressors. While the judge lived, the people remained outwardly faithful to God's law. But on his death, fell back into faithless idolatry. But each time they fell back, they fell further from God and deeper into sin. This happened 13 times. Finally, after the death of Samson, the last judge, who was far from perfect himself, intertribal warfare broke out after a man's concubine was raped to death by Benjamite men. Why did Israel, God's chosen people, slide into idolatry, sin, and depravity? The key is given in chapter 2. After that, the whole generation had been gathered to their fathers, another generation grew up, who neither knew the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. In other words, the older generation had failed to teach their children about the Lord, his law, and all that he had done in the past. In Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 7, God had commanded the people to teach their children about him. You shall teach the laws diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. The book of Judges shows us exactly what happens if parents fail to teach their children about God and his law, both in word and in their own lives. And we see the consequences of this sort of failure all around us today. It really is important that parents bring their children to church and to Sunday school, but it's got to be part of a whole package. 1 hour a week just won't cut it. What God requires is that parents read the Bible, talk about God with their children every day and pray with them. The children must see the reality of their parents' faith lived out day by day in all situations. This builds a foundation in their lives which will never leave them, no matter what happens later in life. Now, the Hebrew word for judge means to deliver or to rule. They had a wide mandate to decide legal cases and punish those who broke the law of Moses. They were also military leaders. The judges were raised up and called by God to deliver his people after he had judged that they had suffered enough under their oppressors. There were some outstanding characters. Among them, Deborah, who was a prophetess and a judge of Israel. Deborah was the second judge at the time that Jabin, the king of the Canaanites, was harshly pressing the Israelites. Deborah called Barak to her and told him the Lord had appointed him to lead the Israelites against Jabin, who had an immensely powerful army of 900 iron chariots. That was the latest technology in those days. God would give him the victory, said Deborah. Barak agreed, but only if Deborah came with him. Well, she replied that she would, but that the Lord would kill Jabin's army commander, Sisera, by the hand of a woman. And if you want to know how that happened, read chapter 4. When Deborah died, the people again sinned and were oppressed by the Midianites. God called Gideon to deliver his people. Gideon is the one who put out a fleece to determine if it really was God speaking to him. After he had mobilized all Israel, the Lord commanded him to dismiss all but 300 to fight a Midianite army that was so large they were described as sand on the seashore. But God gave Gideon a strategy and gave him an incredible victory. The last judge, Samson, was a tragic figure. Born to aged parents, he was dedicated from birth to free Israel from the oppression of the Philistines, who lived along the coast and were technologically more advanced than the Israelites. Samson was given supernatural strength by the Spirit of God, but only as long as he remained faithful to his vows to God as a Nazirite. A Nazirite is someone who is dedicated to God and must drink no alcohol and never cut his hair. You all know the story of how Delilah, a Philistine prostitute, seduced him into revealing the source of his strength, his vow as a Nazirite. She cuts his hair, and he is captured and blinded by the Philistine rulers. He dies after the Lord gives him strength one last time to pull down the pillars of the Philistine temple onto himself, killing thousands of Philistines who'd gathered to watch his execution. The remaining chapters 17 through to 21 describe the sordid idolatry and depravity the Israelites had degenerated to. It is not pleasant reading. The book ends with a telling summary of why things had got so bad morally. In those days, Israel had no king. All the people did whatever seemed right in their own eyes. If you believe you have no moral authority outside of yourself, you have no objective standard to judge what is right and wrong. So you get the situation we have today. Because our society has no universally recognized moral authority such as the Bible, moral good becomes simply doing whatever seems right to you. Sin is seen only as a personal opinion or belief. The result is morality by majority, which quickly degenerates into mob rule, where groups try to impose their version of good on others. This is what happened in Judges, and is what is happening today in many parts of the world. The Bible's answer to this evil is a God-given king. This is what all Christians have been commanded to pray for in the Lord's Prayer. May your kingdom come. May your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Come, Lord Jesus. Now, if you'd like to dig a bit deeper and think about some of the issues and follow them up, here's some discussion questions you may like to consider. Firstly, how important do you think it is for parents to teach their children about God? And secondly, what does the cycle of idolatry, oppression and deliverance that we see in the book of Judges show you about the character of God? And thirdly, do you think the moral laws in the Bible should be the moral authority of your society? If not, what do you think should take its place? And you may like to read Romans chapter 1, verses 18 to 32, as you think about this question. Well, thank you for joining us on our journey through the Bible, and I pray and hope that we will meet again when we consider our next book, the Book of Ruth.